Hello, this is Dr. Kulikamali, and this is week 2 of Advanced Data Analytics. Hopefully, you have fun working on your first week of Advanced Data Analytics and ready for the new concept. During this week, we are going to talk about the natural language processing concept, and we are going to start looking into the ways we can implement the text analytics techniques in Python. So make sure you have your Python ready to go and your Jupyter notebook is set, so we can start writing codes that we can handle the text information. We have a couple of other activities during this week, so pay attention to the due dates and other things, and let's see what we can do. See you in the next video. All right, so the objectives of this week are three main areas. First, we are going to talk about the natural language processing and then a couple of theories that we need to explain. And hopefully you have a better understanding of natural language processing after the implementation of it. And then we review some examples. So what are the basics for natural language processing? Before we get to that, let's review a very important concept. You probably have already heard about it. It's about the big data definition. So we talk about the basic definition of big data, three V's. We have volume, velocity, and variety, and then we get the value added, and then we have 4V, and then we have the other three dimensions added, and we have the 7V definition of the big data. But what are the sources for big data? We have the transactional data that we have acquired from other different sources. We have the public data, we have the sensors, social media. Most of these data sets are structured, but then on the other hand, we have the unstructured data, which actually has a large percentage of most of the business data. And textual information is part of the unstructured data. There are some challenges in analyzing textual information. And in addition to storage and management of that data, we need to also find the useful and meaningful pattern through the textual information. And that's a very big and important challenge. So we need to have a very structured way of thinking into the textual information so we can actually extract those information. So natural language processing is the area that helps us to get those information. And the way the natural language processing works is that it's basically a gold mine for data science. Because without the NLP, we don't have that lens to look into the textual information. And the information becomes very complex and complicated that we have a very low chance of finding useful and valuable information. Natural language itself is a language developed and evolved by humans through the natural use and communication rather than constructing, creating language artificially, like a computer programming language. So it has been actually created through centuries or thousands of years. It's not just one specific programming language. It's the way people talk about different things. So the language philosophy can be seen from three different angles: where the language is coming from, what are the meanings of some of the words, what are the meanings of some terms in language, and finally how to communicate effectively. And then we can talk about the linguistics and what is the linguistics or the language cognition, which helps to understand how the human brain interacts with the language, how it can interpret the actual words. And you probably have already seen some examples that you understand the word, but it's hard to explain it in simple and plain language. So what's the way that we can think about that in a programming environment? So one of the theories that's very important theory that help us understand the natural language processing is triangle of reference model. So the triangle of reference, or just the triangle of meaning, is a model how linguistic symbols are related to the objects they represent. So for example, if you have one object that you have in mind and you want to represent it, you may have some ways to explain that object. And the simplified form of that relationship between the speaker as the subject, whoever explains it, a concept as an object or a friend, and its designation or the sign is the basis of the triangle reference model. So if you want to explain an orange, you may use a picture. That will be your symbol. So the orange is the object that you as the subject want to explain, but you use a symbol to explain it. So depending on the symbol itself, depending on the common understanding of that symbol, the way that could be seen by the other person could be different. So for example, if we just maybe use the color orange instead of the shape of the fruit orange, someone may have a vagueness into understanding the actual meaning of the actual object. The second theory that is used in the NLP to explain the communication foundation is direction of speech representation or word to word. So it indicates using words to match or relate to something that's happening or has already happened. For example, the Eiffel Tower is really big. It accentuates a fact in reality. We already know that the Eiffel Tower is very big. Or it could be something that will happen in the future. I'm going to take a swim. It hasn't happened yet, but because the reality could change in the future, we can use some facts to explain that scenario. So for example, if we have a word that we try to explain, and then we can think about that in our own mind, we may use some words to explain that scenario, and then someone else would interpret that, and then they have an understanding of that word. It could be an object, it could be a scenario, it could be an event. So we have 4 stages for direction of speech representation. We have an intended human thought being coded into words, we extend it to someone else, and that person decoded, and hopefully that word, the second word that someone else has interpreted, would be the exact same word that we wanted to explain. But that's not going to be always the case, because people have different understanding of different objects. Also, people have different understanding of different words, and the way people explain might not be perfect. And also, there are some very important concepts in language that we need to pay attention. Different range language is used in communications. Few of them are being discussed here because they are very important in text analytics. First is locationary, which concerns the actual delivery of the sentence from one human to another by speaking. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to deliver some sentences to you so you can understand some meanings. The locationary is related to actual semantics and significance of the sentence being communicated. So I have something in my mind and try to explain it to you. However, the way that actually that is represented to you might not be what I have intended to. And finally, we have the prolocutionary communication, and that's the effect of communication on the receiver behavior or psychological. Hopefully you have learned something up to this point. So that could be the effect of my explanation, locationary language to you. But is it going to be always effective, or is it going to be always positively related to your behaviors? That is going to be a big question. Let's think about an example. Let's say a father tells a son, get me the book from the library. So because that is an actual semantic, get me the book from the library, that is going to be an locationary act. However, if the son actually brings the book, because that is a change of behavior, that is going to be a precautionary act. I know this is going to be probably somehow crazy, but it helps you to understand the basis for a natural language processing that's in Python. You don't have to have a very in-depth understanding to run some code. But if you don't know what is the meaning of some of these terms, when you look into the literature, you look into some of the research that explain the same concept, you may get confused. So just bear with me, and then we get to the much more interesting part later on. There are some lectionary speech acts, and 5 of them are very important: assertive, telling how things are already existent in this world; directives, ask the message receiver to do something. Right? So I ask you to do your homework. I ask you to do the exam. Commissive, commit the message sender to some future act. So I promise you to fairly grade your works. Expressive, reveal the sender's disposition toward a particular proposition. So my disposition toward not turning the assignment would be that, unfortunately, that would be a big no. So you want to avoid that. And declarations. The power of speech acts able to change reality based on declared propositions. I hereby declare him not guilty. Right? So that will be something you see in the courts. There are some areas for linguistics, of course. This is not the linguistic course, but we have to know some of these information. Why? Because you get to see them in action, even in Python. And then if you don't know what is the meaning of those, you may have a big question mark, and you don't know how to use the tool. And you don't want to use the tool blindly. You want to have a deeper understanding of the tool before you implement anything. You have the phonetics, the phonology, the syntax, semantics, morphology, and lexical. Let's talk about the words in the language. So word is the smallest unit in language, right? That's the basis that we have. Of course, we have letters, but they don't have any meaning. We have the word that they have some meaning, and we can use them to communicate. So we have some forms for the words. Of course, some of them are going to be noun and verb, adjective, verb, and of course we have some other syntax for the words. And then we have the group of words or phrases, and they can represent some more information. And finally, we have clauses, and that way you have a full sentence that can be meaningful. So when we talk about the language semantics or the meaning in the language, that is going to be based on some units, and those are known as lexical units. And lexical units are usually represented by morphemes, and that is the smallest meaningful unit, and of course the correct unit in the language. You may have some specific formats of forms to explain some word that is between you and your friends. No one else understands it. It's correct for you, but it's not going to be universally acceptable. And if you just acquire all these meaningful units, that will be a lexicon. So lexicon is a complete vocabulary of these lexical units. All right. So that is very important. You're going to see that a lot in NLP and in Python. What is a lemma? A lemma is also known as a canonical or citation form of a set of words. So it is the base of set of words known as lexeme. Okay. And for one word, you may have different set of words that can be explained, but the base word would be the lemma. Let's talk about the word sense, which provides a concrete representation of different aspects of word meaning. For example, they have attended an annual fair. What is the meaning of fair here? I hope the judgment is fair for all. So there are different meanings for the fair and depending on the context, you may have different sense for it. So you can have a break right now. I know it's a lot to digest, and maybe you want to take a deep breath. Not going to be the whole semester we talk about the linguistic concepts, but this is the basis. So we just need to understand the main concepts before we can use them. So I'll talk about the text corpora in the next part. All right, so welcome back, and let's talk about the text corpora. So that's the plural form of the text corpus, and that is defined a large and structured collection of text. Of course, it takes time to get to that point, but that is going to be the basis for most of the text analytics processes. And the primary purpose is to leverage them to linguistics as well as statistical analysis, use them as data for building NLP tools. So we need to have some basis for NLP tools, otherwise it would be very difficult to handle a lot of textual information. So we use text corpora annotation utilities, we add tags or the part of speech tagging to them, we create word stems, word lemmas, we create dependency grammar, constituency grammar, and semantic types and roles. So let's talk about this example on the left. So we have they killed the man with a gun. That's sad, right? Don't get to the gun discussion. And we can assign different parts of speech tagging. If it's a noun, it's a verb, is the noun again, a preposition. So all of these could be used to explain every single of these words. Or you can have other tags depending on the combination of the words. The same sentence, if you use dependency grammar, could be explained. So this noun is related to that verb, and this noun is related to with the preposition here. So the way these nouns and where verbs and the definitors, they are related is different. In reality, we are going to use some other libraries that are available for us. We don't need to really create our own dictionary to understand what is the meaning of the words, which one is a verb, which one is an adjective. So we use some popular corpora that are available for us. Of course, each one has a different application. For example, childas is a popular text corpora for children-related material. So we have all this information about them, and they have a WordNet, which is a popular text corpora to analyze information that we have usually acquired through the online platform. And of course, some of them are US-based. For example, Brown corpus is the University of Brown have created that. Some of them are not US-based, the British corpus, the BNC corpus. But overall, we can use any of these in Python as well. We can just download it and take advantage of the corpora. Before we get to the way we can implement it, let's talk about one very important concept, which is n-gram. We're going to see that concept in the future as well. But when we talk about n-gram, that's the way we can differentiate or break down the structure of a sentence. So if you have a sentence, this is a sentence. You can take a look at every single word, and that creates a unigram. So if n is 1, you have 1 gram, or you have unigram, and you can just separate every single word. Of course, that way you can just count how many times you have one word, but you are going to lose lots of context. And then you can, of course, create a more complex type of grams. If you have three words, for example, this is a, that will be one single unit, and you can have that as one single trigram, and then you have another one is a sentence, that's the second trigram. So you have 2 trigrams out of this sentence. Of course, yeah, more words per each of these grams, but you kept the context. So depending on the application, sometimes we just break down the whole text or the text corpus into single words and we create unigrams, or we may get to the trigrams, we may make it to the more complex grams. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about the ways you can access the text Corpora in Python and install NLTK library, and that will be the first implementation of Python in text analytics. So I'll see you in the next video.